Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cameron Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Lindsay, here with another episode. First off, again, I want to say thank you, everybody that has been watching my episodes, watching my interviews. Y'all have been making my love for this channel grow and grow each day, each week, and I'm thankful for that. Like I said, we reached over 100 subscribers now. 105 to be exact right now, and my new goal is to get to 200 to 300 subscribers, somewhere in between there by the end of this year. And like I said, the whole point of this podcast channel is to help me grow as a journalist, help me grow as an analyst also, and my ultimate goal is to work for companies like ESPN, Fox Sports, NFL Network, NFL Live, NBA TNT, MLB, NHL, any of those big companies, College Football Live. And I want to be better journalists than Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp, Dan Orlovsky, Ryan Clark, all of them. I want to be one of the best. I want to go to a career job that I enjoy doing every single day, while still doing this podcast. And by then, this podcast is gonna be completely vamped. It's gonna go from doing it here in my house to a stage, to somebody like Shannon Sharp when he does Club Shay Shay. He has a complete setup that's like very nice, and eventually I want something like that for my podcast, so that my fans can feel very, very comfortable while you're sitting at home watching this episode. So something like that I want for this channel, and I can see that happening with y'all. And even when I get to 1 million subscribers, I'm going to remember who was there from day one, at seeing my channel grow, and from being a small growing podcast to a big worldwide podcast. And the whole point, like I said, the whole point of the channel is also not just me growing as a journalist, but it's so we can grow together. And in a way, I kind of feel like I'm the voice of the voiceless, because the whole point when I started this podcast, I'm watching shows like Undisputed and seeing them give their take and opinion. I'm like, and I disagree with it. I say, you know what? Let me do something about it. Let me start my own podcast, and I give my opinion give my opinion on why I think Skip Bayless is wrong, or why I think Shannon Sharp is right. So this whole point is breaking down esports, athletes, bring y'all important games, important championship games, anything in the world of sports. So yeah, that's the point of this podcast channel on YouTube. And like I said, remember to subscribe. If you know a friend or family member that likes sports, get them to subscribe. Follow me on all my social media platforms that I have listed in the end of this episode. And yeah, I appreciate y'all. But today's this episode will be about the women's 2023 NCAA tournament, and I have my bracket here that I will be filling out alongside with y'all. Now, last episode I did the men's 2023 NCAA tournament bracket, so we already did that. If you haven't seen that episode, pause this episode and go back and watch that one. And then come back and watch this episode. So this is the women's 2023 NCAA bracket, and the Final Four would take place in Dallas, Texas. So yeah, that will be March 31st in the women's national championship game. The Final Four will be March 31st, and yeah, so y'all check that out. But I'm gonna be filling out right alongside y'all. So first we have the Greenville 1 bracket, and so we have the number 1 seed South Carolina women's against. First off, we're gonna start with the first 4 matchups. We have Illinois against 11th seed in Mississippi State. Both fighting for the 11th seed. And I'm going to go with Mississippi State over Illinois. That's for the Greenville 1 bracket. And they're both fighting to face number 4 seeded Creighton. So, yep. Now, we have, and like I said, the first 4 matchups for the women's will be March 15th to the 16th. So, remember to catch that first when you can. We have 16 seeded Southern facing against, I can't pronounce them right, so let me get right there to y'all real quick. Again, this is in the Seattle 4 bracket, and yes, I can't pronounce them. SHU, both fighting for the 16th seed, and I'm gonna go. And Southern's from the SWAC, so I'm gonna go with Southern. Next, we have Tennessee Tech against Monmouth, if I pronounce that right, and I'm gonna go Tennessee Tech. And that's for the Greenville 2 bracket. Now we have Purdue against St. John's fighting for the 11th seed, and that's in the Seattle 3 for the Seattle 3 bracket. And I'm gonna go St. John's. So those are the teams I have winning in the women's first 4 matchups. Again, that's like a play-in tournament, kind of like the NBA does for the playoffs. They have a play-in tournament to see who gets in for the NBA playoffs. And these first 4 matchups are for teams that can get into the round of 64 and get into the first round of the women's NCAA tournament. So those are the teams I have winning the first 4 matchups. Again, Mississippi State over Illinois, Southern over Sacred, Tennessee Tech over Monmouth, and St. John's over Purdue. So let's get to the first round matchup, and that'll be March 17th to the 18th. And first off, we got in the Greenville 1 bracket, the number 1 seed South Carolina Gamecocks against number 16 seed North Fork State. And I'm going to go South Carolina over them. Next up, we have number 8 seeded South Florida over number 9 versus number 9 seed Marquette. And I'm gonna go with South Florida in this matchup. Next up we got number 5th seeded Oklahoma against number 12 seed Portland. And I'm gonna go Oklahoma over Portland. Next up we have number 4 seeded UCLA against number 13 seed Sacramento State. And I'm gonna go with UCLA over Sacramento State. Next up, we have 6 seeded Creighton against number 11 seed Mississippi State. Now in the men's bracket, I had Creighton getting upsetted, but in women's, I'm gonna go say Creighton does not get upsetted, and they will move on. Next up, we have number 3rd seeded Notre Dame against number 14 seed Southern Utah, and I'm going to go Notre Dame over Southern Utah. Next up, we have number 7 seed Arizona Wildcats over number 10 seed West Virginia. And like I said, I got in the last episode for the men's, I got love West Virginia. It's a school I used to go to before I transferred down south and moved back down to Georgia, and now I go to Columbus State. And I'm just like I did for the men, I'm gonna pick the women, and I'm gonna go West Virginia over Arizona for the upset. And next up we got number 2 seeded Maryland against number 15 seeded Holy Cross, and I'm gonna go Maryland over Holy Cross easily. And that will conclude the Greenville 1 bracket. I got South Carolina over number 1 seed South Carolina over number 16 seed North Fork State. Number 8 seeded South Florida over Marquette, 9 seeded Marquette. Got number 5th seeded Oklahoma over number 12 seed Portland. number 4 seed UCLA over 13 seed Sacramento State. I got number 6 seed Creighton over number 11 seed Mississippi State. I got number 3 seed Notre Dame against number 14 seed Southern Utah. I got number 10 seed West Virginia in the upset over number 7 seed Arizona. And I got number 2 seed Maryland over number 15 seed Holy Cross. And next up we have the Seattle 4 bracket. Now, like I said, again, March 17th to the 18th is the first round for the women's NCAA tournament bracket, NCAA tournament round. And this is the Seattle 4 bracket. I just did the Greenville 1 bracket. Now moving on to the Seattle 4 bracket. The number 1 seed is Stanford Cardinal. Will be facing off against Southern, and I have Stanford easily winning that matchup. Next up, we have number 8 seed Ole Miss against number 9 seed Gonzaga, and I'm gonna go with Ole Miss over Gonzaga. Next up, we have number 5th seed Louisville against number 12 seed Drake, and I'm gonna go with Louisville over Drake. Next up, we have number 4 seed Texas on the 13th seed East Carolina. Number 4 seed Texas over number 13 seed East Carolina. So I have Texas beating East Carolina. Next up, we have the number 6 seed Colorado Bison versus number 11 seed Middle Tennessee, and I'll go Colorado over to Middle Tennessee. Next up we have number 30 seed Duke Blue Devils over number 14 versus number 14 seed Iona. I can't pronounce it right. I have Duke moving on in that matchup. Next up, we have number 7 seed Florida State Seminoles against number 10 seeded Georgia Lady Bulldogs. And I'm going to go with, I'm going to say Florida State wins that one. I think Florida State will move on. Next up, we have number 2 seed Iowa against number 15th seed Southeast Louisiana, and I'll go Iowa with an easy win over Southeast Louisiana. So that will conclude the Seattle 4 bracket with Stanford over Southern, number 1 seed Stanford, number 8 Ole Miss over 9 seed Gonzaga, number 5 seed Louisville over 12 seed Drake, number 4 seed Texas over East Carolina, 13 seed East Carolina. Number 6 seed Colorado over 11 seed Middle Tennessee. Number 3 seed Duke over 14 seed Iona. 7 seed Florida State versus over number 10 seeded Georgia. Number 2 seeded Iowa over Southeast Louisiana. So moving on to the Greenville 2 bracket. Again, the first round is March 17th to the 18th, and we will go, 1 seeded Indiana versus Tennessee. Well, I can't pronounce it, but we're going number 1 Indiana over them. And next up, we have number 8 Oklahoma State versus number 9 Miami, in Florida, and I will be going with Oklahoma State Cowgirls over number 9 Miami. Next up, we have number 5 Washington State over them 12 seed FGGU, and I'm gonna go Washington State in that matchup. Next up, we have number 4 seeded Villanova versus number 13 seed Cleveland State. And yeah, I'll go Villanova in that matchup. Next up, we have number 6 seeded Michigan versus 11 seed UNLV, and I'm gonna go Michigan in that matchup. We got number 3 seed LSU versus number 14 seed Hawaii, and I'm gonna go LSU easily, especially with my favorite player in women's college basketball, Angela Reese, aka the Bayou Barbie. So I'm gonna go with LSU. We have 7 seeded NC State against number 10 seeded Princeton, and I'm gonna go NC State in that matchup. Next up, we have number 2 seeded Utah against 15 seed Gardner Webb, and I'm gonna go Utah in that matchup. So that concludes the Greenville 2 bracket. And again, I have Indiana, number 8 seed Oklahoma State, number 5 seed Washington State, number 4 seed Villanova, number 6 seed in Michigan, number 3 seed LSU, number 7 seed NC State, number 2 seed Utah. Moving on to the second round in the women's NCAA tournament. Next up, we got the Seattle 3 bracket. We have Virginia Tech, number 1 seeded Virginia Tech against number 16th seed Chattanooga, and I'm gonna go Virginia Tech easily. Next up, we have number 8 seeded USC versus 9 seed South Dakota State, and I'm gonna go USC in that matchup. Next up, we have number 5 seeded Iowa State Lady Cyclones against number 12 seed Toledo Rockets, and I'm gonna go Iowa State in that matchup, number 5 seeded. Next up, we have number 4 seed Tennessee Lady Volunteers against number 13 seed St. Louis, and I'm gonna go with Tennessee. Next up, we have number 6 seeded North Carolina Lady Tar Heels against 11 seeded St. John's, and I'm gonna go North Carolina in that matchup. Next up, we have number 3 seed Ohio State University against number 14 seed James Madison, and I'm gonna go Ohio State. Sorry for my pronunciation for that. Ohio State. Next up, we have number 7 seed Baylor against number 10 seeded Alabama, and I'm gonna go with Baylor over Alabama. And lastly, we have number 2 seeded UConn Lady Huskies over versus number 15 seed Vermont, and I'm gonna go UConn for that matchup. So, and that will conclude the Seattle 3 bracket in the first round of the women's NCAA tournament. Again, that will be March 17th to the 18th. So make sure y'all catch the women's NCAA tournament as well as the men's. So back to the Greenville 1 bracket, we have the second round of the women's NCAA tournament. That will be March 19th to the 20th. And then I have number 1 South Carolina Gamecocks versus number 8 South Florida, and I got South Carolina easily moving on. Again, like I said, they're undefeated. They've been the most consistent team in all of women's college basketball, and they're the defending champs looking to go back-to-back titles. So I have South Carolina easily moving on against South Florida. Next up, we got number 5 seeded Oklahoma against number 4 seeded UCLA. And I'm going to go with UCLA in this matchup. Number 4 seed to face South Carolina in the Sweet 16. So next up, we have number 6 seeded Creighton against number 3rd seed Notre Dame. And I'm going to go Notre Dame over Creighton to move on to the Sweet 16. Next up, we have number 10 seeded WVU over number 2 seed Maryland. So, and like I had for the men, if you watch my men's bracket for last episode, I had WVU men's team losing in the second round, and just like that, I'm gonna have to say it ends here for my former school, and I have number 2 seed Maryland beating West Virginia in the second round, moving on to the Sweet 16 against Notre Dame. And that will conclude the Greenville 1 bracket for the second round. I have South Carolina, number 1 seeded South Carolina Gamecocks over number 8 seeded Florida, number 5 seeded Oklahoma losing to number 4 seeded UCLA. I have number 3 seeded Notre Dame over number 6 seeded Creighton. I have number 2 seeded Maryland over number 10 seed WVU. And those are the teams I have moving on to the Sweet 16 from the Greenville 1 bracket. Next up, we have the Seattle 4 bracket again. We have number 1 seed Stanford versus number 8 seed Ole Miss. And I'm going to go with Stanford. I feel like Stanford has too much size. Especially their whole team has way too much size for Ole Miss. And I don't think they're going to be able to out-rebound them or really keep them off the glass. So I'm going to go with number 1 Stanford. We have 5th seeded Louisville versus number 4 seeded Texas. And I'm going to go number 4 seed. I'm gonna go with 4th seed Texas on this one over Louisville in a close one. Next up, we have number 6 seeded Colorado against number 3rd seed Duke Blue Devils, and I'm gonna go with Colorado for the upset over Duke. So I feel like the women's Colorado team will upset the women's Duke Blue Devils. I have number 7 seed Florida State versus number 2 seeded Iowa. And I'm going to go with Iowa over Florida State. So that will conclude the second round of the Seattle 4 bracket. I have number 1 seeded Stanford moving on to Sweet 16 over number 8 seeded Ole Miss. I have number 4 seeded Texas moving on to the Sweet 16 against Stanford, beating number 5 seed Louisville. I have number 6 seeded Colorado beating number 3 seeded Duke, moving on to the Sweet 16. And have number 2 seeded Iowa moving on to the Sweet 16 against Colorado, beating Florida State. So that's the Seattle 4 bracket. Now moving on to the Greenville 2 bracket, we have the number 1 seeded Indiana Hoosiers against Oklahoma State, number 8 seeded Oklahoma State, and I have Indiana moving on over Oklahoma State. Next up, we have Washington State, number 5 Washington State against number 4 seeded Villanova, and I'm gonna go with Villanova over Washington State. Next up, we have number 6 seeded Michigan against number 3 seed LSU, and like I said, in my opinion, who's the women's college basketball player of the year, Angela Reese. She averages over 23 points per game, over 13 rebounds a game, and I think she's the player of the year. And I feel like she's going to lead LSU over Michigan, and I have LSU beating Michigan, moving on to the Sweet 16. Next up, we have number 7 seed NC State against number 2 seeded Utah, and I'm going to go with Utah over NC State. Next, and that will conclude the Greenville 2 bracket. So that will be number 1 seed Indiana over Oklahoma State. That'll be number 4 seed Villanova over Washington State. Number 3 seed LSU over number 6 seed Michigan. And I got number 2 seed Utah over number 7 seed NC State. So that'll be Greenville 2 bracket. Now, moving on to the Seattle 3 bracket of the women's NCAA tournament. we have number one. I have in the second round. I have number 1 seeded Virginia Tech versus number 8 seed USC, and I got Virginia Tech moving on to the Sweet 16. Next up, we have number 5th seed Iowa State versus number 4 seed Tennessee, and I got Tennessee Lady Volunteers moving on to the Sweet 16 against Virginia Tech. Next up, we have North Carolina versus number 6 seed North Carolina against number 3 seed Ohio State. And I'm going to go North Carolina in an upset over Ohio State. We got number 2 seed UConn against number 7 seed Baylor. And I'm going to go UConn over Baylor to advance to the Sweet 16. So again, that's number 1 seeded Virginia Tech over number 8 seed USC. Number 4 seed Tennessee over number 5 seed Iowa State. I got North Carolina in the upset over Ohio State. And I got number 2 seeded UConn over number 7 seed Baylor to move on to the Sweet 16. So, but yeah, now to the Sweet 16 round. And that will be March 24th to the 25th. And we're going to start with the Greenville bracket. And that will be number 1 seeded South Carolina. I have against number 4 seeded UCLA. And I have South Carolina easily over UCLA. Moving on to the Elite 8. We have, next up we will have the number 3 seed Notre Dame Lady Fighting Irish over number 2 seed versus number 2 seed Maryland. And I'm going to go with Notre Dame in this matchup to move on to the Elite 8 against South Carolina. So again, I got number 1 seed South Carolina over number 4 seed UCLA and number 3 seed Notre Dame over number 2 seed Maryland to face each other in the Elite 8. Next up, in the Seattle 4 bracket, we have number 1 Stanford against number 4 Texas. And I got Stanford beating Texas again. Stanford, I think, has the best size in this bracket. Has way too much size for Texas. And they will move on to the Elite 8. I have Colorado versus number 2 seed Iowa. I feel like Iowa definitely way too good. They gave Indiana a real run for their money in the regular season and to win the regular season title. And I got Iowa over Colorado moving on to the Elite 8 against number 1 Stanford. So again, Stanford over Texas, number 1 seed over number 4 seed. Number 6 seeded Colorado Bison against number 2 seeded Iowa. And I got number 2 seed Iowa over 6 seeded Colorado. So that's for the Seattle 4 bracket. Moving on to the Greenville 2 bracket. I have number 1 seeded Indiana versus number 4 seed Villanova. Sorry for my pronunciation. Number 4 seed Villanova. And I have Indiana over Villanova moving on to the Elite 8. Next up we have number 3 seed LSU versus number 2 seed Utah. And of course I'm going with LSU with the best player in the college basketball and women's college basketball, in my opinion, number 10, Angela Reese. And I'm going to go LSU moving on to Elite 8 to face Indiana. Next up we have, they'll be the Greenville 2 bracket. So I have Indiana over number 4 seed Villanova, they're the number 1 seed, and number 3 seed LSU over number 2 seed Utah. Next up we got the Seattle 3 bracket in the women's NCAA tournament. Excuse me. I have number 1 seeded Virginia Tech against number 4 seed Tennessee Lady Volunteers. And I'm going to go with an upset and say Tennessee will beat Virginia Tech in the Sweet 16. And I'm going to have the Lady Volunteers moving on to the Elite 8. Next up, we have number 2 seeded UConn against number 6 seeded North Carolina. And of course, I'm going to go with UConn. I have so much respect for their women's basketball program. and I feel like they will beat North Carolina and move on to the Elite Eight. And that's the Seattle 3 bracket. So now we have the Elite Eight portion of the bracket. So we're getting closer down to the Final Four and then the National Championship. So back to the Greenville 1 bracket, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks, number 1 seed against number 3 seed Notre Dame. And I have South Carolina winning over Notre Dame big, moving on to the Final Four, representing the Greenville 1 bracket. And in the Seattle 4 bracket, I have number 1 Stanford versus number 4 seeded Texas. And I'm going to go with, I have number 1 Stanford against number 2 seeded Iowa. Excuse my partner reading my bracket. And I have Stanford over, I'm going to go with Iowa. I'm going to go with Iowa. Number 2 seeded Iowa over Stanford. Even though Stanford does got the size, I feel like Iowa, in my opinion, has the number 2, the second best, one of the best players in college basketball. And I feel like they're a really good, pretty good shooting team. And I think they will upset Stanford in the Elite Eight and move on to face South Carolina in the women's Final Four in Dallas. Next up to the Greenville 2 bracket, I have the number 1 seeded Lady Indiana Hoosiers against number 3 seeded LSU. Now, this is a real good matchup right here, but again, I'm going with LSU. They got the best player in women's college basketball. I understand South Carolina does have arguably probably the best college basketball player on their team, but in my opinion, I feel like Angela Reese, they may have the better overall team, but I feel like Angela Reese is the better overall player, and I'm going to go with LSU over Indiana, moving on to the Final Four. So, yes, that's for the Greenville 2 bracket. I have LSU moving on. And like I said, if I didn't say in the Seattle 4 bracket, I have Iowa moving on from the Seattle 4 bracket over Stanford. Now, lastly, we have in the Seattle 3 bracket, number 4 seed Tennessee, Lady Volunteers versus number 2 seed UConn. And for this one, I'm going to go with, I feel like I would pick UConn, but I feel like they just ain't been really that consistent this year. So I'm going to go with Lady Volunteers Tennessee to represent the Seattle 3 bracket and upset number 2 seed UConn for a rematch in the SEC tournament and to face number 3 seed LSU in the Final Four. So again, the Elite Eight is March 26th to the 27th, and which I think, like I said, these dates may change, but like I said, these dates are a little mixed up. So but I can get that right now of what the women's Final Four for the women's Final Four. Yes, the women's Final Four is March 31st. The national championship game is April 2nd. So yeah, March 31st, the Final Four. So yes, let's get to that. So from South Carolina, from the Greenville bracket, South Carolina number 1 seed against number 2 seeded Iowa, and I got South Carolina easily being too much for Iowa, and I got them moving on to the national championship game. And I have number 3 seed LSU against number 4 seed Tennessee in a rematch from the SEC tournament, and I have Angela Reese leading the LSU Lady Tigers over the Lady Volunteers to move on in a rematch against South Carolina from the regular season to face each other in Dallas for the national championship game. Now, unlike the men's ones, this one is real interesting. Going back and forth in my head right now about this because, like I said, I watched this game in the regular season live on TV, and South Carolina did dominate the LSU Tigers, but I feel like LSU is going to, if they match up with South Carolina in the national championship game, they're going to watch that tape, they're going to learn from the regular season. And I feel like in a close one, the LSU Tigers, led by Angela Reese, will win the women's NCAA national championship. over South Carolina. So I have LSU winning over South Carolina, denying South Carolina a perfect season in their back-to-back national championships. And I feel like LSU will win it all. So, but like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if South Carolina wins it. Like I said, unlike the men's one where I said in the last episode, if you watched it, where I said in the men's college basketball, there hasn't been no team that really stands out. But in women's, I feel like South Carolina has been way more consistent. Way more, they stand out way more. So it would not surprise me if South Carolina wins this, but I'm going to go with LSU, led by Angela Reese. And I feel like she's going to solidify herself as the best women's college basketball player in the nation. But like I said, just like for the men's, I want y'all to also let me know what y'all women's bracket is. Like I said, the women's tournament is very interesting as well. It's going to be in Dallas, Texas, in the American Airlines Arena. And the men's Final Four is going to be in Houston, Texas, in the Houston Texans Stadium. So it's both going to be big. It's March Madness. So I don't like the men's. I don't have too many upsets, but it's going to still going to, I feel like still will be some madness either way. So don't get mad. Like I said, for the men's bracket last episode, don't get mad if your bracket busts on the first day. Like I said, mine may crumble and I may throw this away the first day, but I feel like doing something like this, filling out a bracket, is very fun. It's very entertaining. Like I said, it's March Madness. It's a big time of the year for college basketball fans, for basketball fans, period. So if you're a fan of this sport, make sure you fill out a bracket. Comment down below, share, and let me know who you got in your Final Four. Again, I got South Carolina, Iowa, LSU, and Tennessee in my women's Final Four. And like I said, watch for my men's bracket. You go back and watch if you haven't, who I got in my men's Final Four. And like I said, this whole podcast really is, like I said, my growth as a journalist, as an analyst. I want to work for big companies. I want to be on ESPN, Undisputed. I want to be on NFL Network, MLB, NHL, any of them. I want to be the best, but I can't do that without my family, y'all. I can't do that without my day one subscribers. We're going to continue to grow. Again, like, comment, share. Anybody you know, a colleague, a work buddy, friend, girlfriend, cousin, anybody, share this channel, share this episode, and so we can grow together and improve as we go along. But like I said, I really appreciate y'all watching this episode. It's March Madness. The March Madness begins this week, so watch. Like I said, as you're watching this video, I hope you're getting ready for some madness to happen because it's coming. So, but I really appreciate each and every one of y'all for tuning in. Eventually, I'm gonna start by, doing something for my subscribers to show my appreciation for each and every one of y'all, and maybe picking a random subscriber to show some extra love too. So I'm gonna brainstorm about that, but I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and I'll catch y'all next week for another episode. And yeah, this has been Cameron Lindsay, the host of Cameron Sports Podcast, and I'll be seeing y'all next time.